It should be recording now. Excellent. So hello, everyone. Lovely to have you all here. I just want to start by saying that I feel deeply touched and gifted, like gifted in the sense of receiving a gift, to have all of you here to co-create on what I think is an example of the most important kinds of project we need to be creating, which is projects that have the potential to create transformational systems change. And this is something that you hear a lot of talk about in the kind of social entrepreneurship circles, but very few examples of people actually doing it. And one of the many reasons for that, but I think a very important reason, is that social entrepreneurship is mostly a rich person's game. And so a lot of the efforts to create transformational systems change is rich people trying to get other rich people to give them money to enable them to do big projects. And one thing I've seen with attempts to create regeneration funds is that the impact investors don't understand this way of investing. So they don't invest their money and the money doesn't move. And so this elite model of fundraising and investing is not getting us where we need to go. And if we wanted to eventually catch up with us, we need to take the lead. And so I say this because what we're going to talk about today is a way of creating something like an impact fund, but it's something we can create together using crowdfunding and grassroots organizing, and that it can enable us to create various kinds of commons that we can all access and use without having to pay for in the future. And a very simple example would be if someone comes to Barichara to do work with us, we'd be able to provide housing for them so they don't pay for their housing. That's a very simple example. But this sort of thing where people are trying to make life changes and they need various kinds of support, we need to create environments that enable them to make those changes easily and with guided instruction and advice and mentoring and various other kinds of transitional steps in their lives. And so what we're really talking about here is a specific model for the territory and bioregion of Barichara, but a prototype for any other bioregion on Earth, with a proactive goal to partner in creating networks of bioregional collaboration. So with that said, what I'd really like to do is to have an opening circle where each of us can share just briefly who we are and why we're here, and maybe like 30 seconds to 1 minute per person. And then what I'd like to do is give a brief presentation so that we have a shared context of what we're talking about today with the Barichara Regeneration Fund. And then from there, we can start having an open dialogue. And I think this meeting can go for about 90 minutes. So we have about an hour and a half or a little bit less than that now. And that we can use this full time to start getting to know each other and having active discussion and dialogue. And that presentation is really a way of creating a shared context and shared frame in which to have the discussion of what we're doing and then begin to co-create together afterwards. So with that said, I believe everyone here knows who I am, but just in case, hi, I'm Joe Brewer. And the reason I'm the one hosting all of you today is because instead of publishing a book a year ago, I decided to create a study group. And the study group around the manuscript of the book has now grown into the Earth Regenerators community, which has more than 2,300 members at the moment. And we're very actively trying to decentralize its leadership and build various support capacities for it. So this focus on Barichara is ever present in the context of the Earth Regenerators community. You could think of it as a concrete manifestation of what we're trying to do with that network located in one bioregion with a continual connection between the two. So that's briefly, hi, that's me. What I'd love to do is start the process of each person introduce yourself, just say your name, maybe where you are in the world. I'm in Barichara, Colombia, which I didn't just say. And just share one thing about why you're here, what you hope to get out of this, what inspired you to come. So if you would just say your name, where you are, in something brief about why you're here. And the way that we can make a sequence to include everyone is each person after they speak can choose the next person to speak. So with that said, I will nominate PJ to go next because I know he's familiar with this and I'm not putting him so much on the spot. But then we'll just go in a sequence of introduce ourselves, why we're here, and then pass it to the next person. So on to you, PJ.
Can you hear me? All right, cool. Hi, everybody. I'm PJ Connolly. I am currently sitting on the space coast of Florida, in Melbourne, Florida. And I am here because I feel very blessed to be here in this capacity to be helping Joe as an apprentice or as a gopher, or really, I guess, somebody he can just turn to for administrative and other help on this project as a part of my capstone project for my MBA in sustainability that I'm doing through Bard College. So very excited to finally have this working group coming together. It's something we've been talking about for a while now, and very excited to see where this goes.
And then PJ, pass it to the next person. Oh, PJ, did we lose you? Shall I select the next person? Okay, maybe since we have a time delay here, I will select the next person and say maybe Helen, would you like to go next?
Hi, yeah, my name is Helen Perks. I am right now in Southeast Portugal. I have been in some meetings with Joe and other people as part of the Community Earth Regenerated training group. So we've had various sessions and we're going to be co-hosting some webinars in the future. And I am here because I've been working the last few years in agroforestry, and I'm interested in ways to build agroforestry projects in a broader context in these types of setups like Joe is trying to set up in different parts of the world. And I'm trying to set something up in Guinea-Bissau in West Africa in the next few years. There's two PJs now. Julian.
Hey, everybody. My name is Julian Wong. I'm calling from San Jose, California. To be honest, I was a little conflicted on joining this particular group, in part because it's elements of this group hit a little close to home on my current day job, which is helping startup companies in the Silicon Valley raise money, and obviously that's a very neoliberal sort of model, and so I've really been looking more for something to as far away from that as possible. But at the same time, I realized that what we're doing here is something completely different, and so in that vein, I feel obligated at least try to offer to see how elements of my current skills might possibly transfer to what we're trying to accomplish here. So thank you. Let me call in Jeff McNeely.
I'm Jeff McNeely. I am coming to you today from Whidbey Island in the state of Washington. And I am here. I actually met Joe here on Whidbey Island 8 years ago-ish, and have been walking many parts of this path with him since. And I'm not so versed in the financial side of it. I'm more operations and data, but I expect there'll be some part to play as this unfolds, and and in it for the journey. So thank you. And next I'll just go Ava.
Hi, so I'm Ava, and I'm calling in from France, Provence, in the south. And I am here because I would love to learn, and also I want to contribute in any way I can. And I will actually be joining Joe from January to April in Colombia to help out. I'm currently a data analyst and researcher. And I've also been working as a consultant, so I'm good with like documents and stuff. So maybe if we have some of that, I can help out with that. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to learning from all of you guys and contributing. Yeah. So I'll pass on to Max.
Thank you, Eva. Hey, everybody. I'm Max. I'm in Kansas City, Missouri, Joe's home state. Represent. I'm just interested in helping to create scaffolding or a society that enables people to live sane lives, create some stability for the people that I care about by building out systems that allow us to live more authentically human lives. I'm interested in human psychology and spiritual development, and I love gardening, and I love talking to people that are interested in creating a healthier world. So definitely very excited to be here. I've also been in discussion with Joe about going down to Barichara to help and to learn. And I've just been in a space of figuring out how I'm going to apply my my capacities to facilitate what we're doing here. And I'll go ahead and call on Gail.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gail Cullen. I'm calling in from Queens, New York. I have a background that meshes well with this project. I'm a grant writing consultant, so I've been doing that for a long time, and Elise is adorable. I'm also a co-director of a nonprofit that does wild parrot conservation in Latin America. So our work kind of meshes with what Joe's trying to do, but I've also been following Joe for years on Facebook and his work. And I've gotten to a point in my life, a lot of the work I do is background, you know, administration, fundraising, that kind of stuff. I want to have do something it's not literally hands-on, but it's getting closer to be hands-on, to really, other than the parrot work, that to some extent too, but something where I can know that I'm really contributing to something real. And I just think this is so important, and it's big, and that's what we need right now in this world. So I call on Stan.
Thank you, Gail. And thank you, Joe. So I'm Stan Curtis. I'm a techie. My PhD topic was limits to growth. I worked for IBM, so I know some New York kind of stuff, and did some startups after graduate school with MIT's AI lab, and done a lot with Stanford lately, you know, Julian. But I'm really interested in doing this in my backyard. I just got off a workshop with OMSI, the Oregon Museum of Science, and we're doing a project with the Native American tribes. And I think the goals are noble, but this is the real authentic group in terms of, you know, equity and inclusion. So, you know, we're very interested in helping Black Lives Matter, but I think this pro-social approach is something we need to adopt. My background is mostly in open source, and we were very early on, you know, in the early days of Free Software Foundation, going against gravity and going against what IBM wanted with their patents for new economic models. So we've been continuing to scale that up. Portland is really famous for that. And that's at the heart of what I'm hoping I can help, apply the lessons we learned in the open source culture and see how we scale that to real estate, especially the food economy. So thank you. And I'll pass it to Amber.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you. Haku haku. Hello, I'm Amber. I live in Ojai, or Ojai as we call it. I'm Shumash, and yeah, I've been studying regeneration for a number of years now. Joe's work came to me in 2014, and I resonate most with his work as well as like Daniel Christian Wall and folks like that. And my background and my interest is in at least is in a regenerative culture as a whole, and how we can sort of bridge into creating culture that is responsive and is able to not be prescriptive, but is able to release the energies of people. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Something that's not just colonization repeated again in a different green form. Glad to be here. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to call on Rafaela.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, fantastic. So, hello everyone, I'm Rafaela. I sit in Copenhagen, but I'll move to Panama in a month, and I'm Italian. And I'm new to this group, and I'm new to permaculture. I'm currently studying, and I will meet my mentor in Panama. She has a food forest there, and I'm just, I want to learn. I want to learn more and try, and then eventually come back to Europe and do something myself. And meanwhile, I want to connect to a network of people with the same kind of goal. And yeah, I'm curious to see how I can help and what we plan to do today. Well, as a background, I'm an engineer, and the last 15 years I spent to mainly fundraising for research projects in Europe. So that's it. And I call to Sela.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Salah. I'm based in Brisbane, Australia. I'm very heavily involved in, I guess what I would sum up as social transformation based on social investment principles and understanding how to get more bridges between where the money sits and what we actually need and where we need it. I'm curious about this project and about what Joe is proposing, so I'm very intrigued to hear what the plans are. And can I pass to Tyler?
Hey, I'm Tyler. I'm calling from New Haven, Connecticut. Let's see. Yeah, Joe, just want to thank you. Your work has been a big inspiration and valuable source for me over the past year as I've kind of diven into this landscape of knowledge and exploration. So I'm really excited to engage more deeply. I think I'm coming at this project also recently getting involved in some alternative currency learning and some involvement with a group called Seeds that is trying to build a currency specifically designed for regenerative projects. And so I'm approaching both of these with a beginner's mind and curious to see the thought that's being put into this Barichara program and how there may or may not be synergy with folks trying to fund these sorts of programs with alternative currencies. I have a bit of a background in renewable energy and energy storage, but that's kind of one of many things I juggle in addition to doing some climate justice organizing here in Connecticut. Let's see, I'll pass it to John Stephen.
Thank you, Tyler. Hi, everybody. I'm John Stephen Bianchi. When I first heard Joe speak a few months ago, I thought everything he said was right. And he was describing his book, The Design Pathway, which I hadn't read before. So that was the start of my road to being here today. I have a great interest in world agricultural funding, and particularly in creating much closer relationships between farmers in the developed world and smallholder farmers. I think it's very important that there be a connected worldwide network of farmers and families. I work as Director of Conservation, formerly Director of Impact at Iroquois Valley Farmland REIT, a public benefit corporation based in Illinois. I'm calling from Wilmette, Illinois right now. And our company supports family farmers to farm organically and regeneratively. We're a private capital company, so we use private investors' money to support farmers to grow and expand their organic operations. I'm grateful to be here with you all, and I will pass it to Laura Parker? No.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, good. Thanks. Take it away, Laura.
All right. Thank you. I'm Laura Parker, and I'm so thrilled to hear all the skills that are in this group. I'm honored to be among you all. So I met Joe last year when I traveled to Costa Rica to be in his Managing Planetary Collapse workshop. And of all the people that I've come across who are doing this work, which granted is not that many people, but I'm just so inspired with the way Joe puts it all together. Like, I just love and trust Joe's big picture vision of kind of taking things out of these little academic silos and weaving this comprehensive view that we need right now. So I just want to be part of this. I'm curious about how I will be able to contribute. I am a psychotherapist, and I live in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. And so my particular talent or skill is around regulating emotions and communication and relationships. So that's my strength. And so I guess the pro-social bent is something, an area where I might be able to offer something here. And I just look forward to helping in whatever way that I can. And I will call on Rolf.
Hi there, everybody. Yeah, I'm calling from Canberra at the moment on my way back to Melbourne, where I used to live. I've relocated to northern New South Wales, getting involved with an eco-village project there. So there's some relevance. It's quite a large piece of land. Also have a background for over 2 decades in innovation and startups, with a strong focus on how to create high leverage change. And I'm getting involved with a project called earthbank.io, which is looking at how to channel funds to regenerative projects, particularly initially in terms of carbon, but wanting to go a lot further than carbon into other criteria for more holistic change and interventions. So I haven't started with them yet, but I think that could be a touch point for this project to potentially channel some funds in. And I think I will hand over to Chad. I think he might be the only one left.
Hello, I'm Chad. I think Joe actually released his book on my birthday about a year ago. It was a wonderful birthday present. Learned about Earth Regenerators just a little bit after that. Became involved. For a long time, I've been involved in academia, working in sustainability science, Earth system governance, except the last couple of years. So I've stepped aside from that and been looking for different projects to get involved with. Earth Regenerators has stoked some of those interests. Also, another thing is local currencies. I think somebody else mentioned local currencies. So I'm working on one here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and realizing the potential and the limitations around that. But in doing so, I began to study up about different financial models and think more deeply about the nature of finance itself. And in the course of that, saw some ideas spreading up around our discussions in Earth Regenerators. Also reading some of the material around regenerative finance from the Capital Institute, and sort of envisioning, in a vague sense, what that might look like along the lines of, say, I think seeds was also mentioned, might look like in the terms of creating a system by which the ability to generate collective wealth is actually itself fed back into the community in a way that our current financial system doesn't at all achieve. So thinking about that and seeing some of those ideas forming around this group, maybe want to jump in today. And it's just really exciting to see moving from a discussion phase into something with a mixed incarnation. So glad to be here. And is there anybody else?
I see Sandra joined us at the last moment. So Sandra, if you would like to, we're just completing a round of introductions where everyone is saying where they're calling in from, what their name is, and one reason why they're here.
Yes,
And
hello.
so,
Very sorry
please,
to join late.
yeah.
Just was finishing another meeting. So, yes, I am Sandra Enriquez Polo. My name is Sandra Enriquez Polo, and I am a freelance consultant. I am a specialist in climate finance, particularly, and as part of these current challenges that we are facing, all of us in Mexico City stuck in our house, I initiated a nonprofit initiative. It is not legally incorporated though, but it's working very well. We are supporting 12 communities to do a transition to regenerative development. These communities are basically all over Mexico, and we recently joined a couple of communities, one in Costa Rica and one in Guatemala. I'm very happy to be here, and I hope I can contribute to this very nice endeavor. I've been exchanging messages and following Joe, and one of the key areas that I truly believe is that small and medium small holders, scale holders, producers, enterprises that will and always have take us out of every challenge globally that we have faced. So I am very happy to be here because I do believe in this endeavor. Of course, I as part of my freelance working, I also work with large-scale projects. But nonprofit, we decided to move forward with this kind of communities, smallholders, small producers, organic producers, and it's working well. So I'm excited to be part of all this nice endeavor. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias. Es buenísimo que estás aquí con
Gracias,
nosotros.
Gracias.
Me gusta mucho. So I think that we're in a really nice place to see that what we have here in this group with 18 of us at the moment is a nice little like kernel of diversity. And what we've seen in every other aspect of the Earth Regenerators Network and the other groups, the Regeneration Collab and ecosystem restoration camps, and on and on. There are lots of networks and groups doing work that we are a part of. And one thing that comes up continuously is how capable we are. Like as groups of people, we are just incredible groups of people. And I see a beautiful slice of this diversity in the call today. So this is something I see every time, and it's just a beautiful thing. What I want to do now is give a brief presentation that will give us some shared context. And what I want us to have in mind as I'm giving this presentation is even during the parts that sound conceptual and theoretical, which will be blended in with the idea of doing something very tangible, what we're really trying to do here is create a different way of organizing human beings that is very much like indigenous cultures around the world, and at the same time is necessarily focused on regenerating landscapes because the non-indigenous cultures of the world have done so much damage to those landscapes. And so we have to really find a way to do something different from what indigenous cultures have done, and at the same time do it in an ethic and a life way that is deeply harmonious with the way indigenous cultures have done it. And so we're in a space that is in some sense unprecedented and new, even though we have a huge history of wisdom traditions and proven practices to draw from. So I wanted to just start by naming that because I'm going to be talking about a project that is in a bioregion where the indigenous people were driven to extinction about 300 years ago. We are in the ancestral land of the Guane people. And before the Guane people were another people whose name we don't know. But the earliest archaeological record for this part of the Andes goes back about 13,000 years. So this is not a place to tread lightly as if we new kids on the block really know anything. We have so much to learn from the land itself. And that's something I want to stress right from the beginning, is that what I'm really talking about is activating the ability to learn from landscapes and how to learn from landscapes while partnering with them. And to do that, we need to be able to see landscapes as nested systems. And I chose this image, which has been used in some other presentations I've given. I chose this image to remind us that while Barichara is a town of 6,000 people in a little section of the Andes mountain range, there are large networks of river systems and mountains that are the larger continent that we're a part of. And we're wanting to build relationships across this tapestry of landscapes at the continental scale and eventually also at the planetary scale. So what I want to talk about now is the Barichara Regeneration Fund. And I want to frame it in this way. I want to say that what we're really trying to create here is a bioregional investment platform, which is a shared infrastructure and capacity for looking at the flow of every kind of value and benefit, everything that could be invested. So money is an obvious one, but time, resources of other kinds, technical skills, knowledge, there are many things that can be brought, and we can reinvest the cultural knowledge of this place and its ecological heritage. But the idea of creating a bioregional investment platform has two really key elements. One of them is structural and the other one is dynamic. The structural piece is that a bioregional investment platform is a portfolio of projects. So you take an entire landscape, look at where all the projects exist on the landscape, and then organize them around the structures and the relationships of the land. For example, where water flows, where migration patterns are for animals, where ecological corridors exist connecting different regions, where the different soil types are, and what can be done on them. So you organize the human network of projects around the territorial landscape. That's the structural piece. The dynamic piece is we want to create a robust circulation of values and benefits for the whole system. So if we have a portfolio of projects, we are directing their performance toward the performance of the whole system. And we're looking at the health and well-being of the whole system as we develop and connect the portfolio of projects. So these two pieces together are really important for us to think about as we look at a specific landscape. Another way of thinking of this, to go back to the discussion that we had back in March and April about the Earth Regeneration Fund, is that it's possible to reframe what a bank is by thinking of the land itself as the bank, and the regenerative investments come from and go back to the bank. So if we're able to retain water and soils, train people and provide livelihoods for how to live in a landscape, cycle the nutrients and create material flows, and so on, these kinds of activities, then we are also able to grow the capacities of the local economy and weave them together across the landscape. So this way of thinking about land as a community commons and as a place from which value is created and back to which value circulates and flows is a way of thinking about the structure of this portfolio of projects and how robust circulation is both ecological and cultural at the same time. The other thing I want to share is that there's this model for creating a network of land trusts that we talked about in the Earth Regeneration Fund. And I would say this is part of the inspiration for the Barichara Regeneration Fund, although we will do things in addition to this. The basic idea is to pool resources of various kinds, which includes money, use them to purchase degraded land or to partner with people who have land to protect and restore their land. Start protecting the land and initiate regenerative practices. When we do this, it creates various kinds of value. We retain water, we grow the soils, we produce food, we grow building materials, we create medicinal plants that we can use to create medicine. Whatever the regenerative practices are, they create various kinds of value. These values can be reinvested in the community and into the landscape itself. And if we do this well, we create a circulation pattern that grows the wealth of the community, which allows us to bring more land into the process and repeat this model of development so that we can keep moving in this cycle. So this is a key aspect of how degraded land can become a source of wealth creation. But the wealth creation becomes wealth extraction if it's not connected into the circulation of the local community. So it's really important to have a portfolio of projects so that we can explore the circulation pattern and really do our best to promote its health and well-being. Another thing that we said for the Earth Regeneration Fund, which we would prototype in this Barichara Regeneration Fund, is that really this isn't about money and it isn't about land. Those are secondary aspects. The primary focus is cooperation. Learn to work as functioning groups of human beings. This is where we've talked a lot about the pro-social framework and other aspects of our work in Earth Regenerators. So if you think of the portfolio of projects, they need to have frameworks of cooperation and frameworks of collective learning, so we learn from each other. So the idea is that whatever this fund is able to do with a foundation that we're creating in Barichara, we can acquire, can purchase land to regenerate, and we can also partner with existing projects that we don't own. It's actually very important, as we'll see with one of our examples where we initiated a conversation to possibly buy the land. They told us a price that was too high, so we flipped the script around and said, we're not going to buy the land. What can we do with the same money that allows the owner to keep their land? And that we could actually do better things with the money than spending it to buy it. So this idea of partnering with other projects and not being the owners is really important as well. And to do this, we want to create a scale and diversity of projects, so maybe 20 or 30 of them spread across the landscape, that allows us to really get a feel for the robust dynamic circulation and the health and well-being of the entire landscape, which means we can create different measures for regeneration. Maybe some projects have specific measures that other projects don't. And there might also be measures of the portfolio overall that is not reducible to individual projects. So we need to create these measurement frameworks and test them. And at the same time, because it's a portfolio approach, we spread out the diversity of risks and the diversity of benefits, making the entire project more resilient and a better investment. And since the whole thing is a learning process, it's continually evolving into different kinds of cooperation, creating new aspects of what it means to be a platform. So you might ask, what is a platform? And I give you an answer. A year from now, I might give you a different answer because we've learned better ways to be a platform. So this continual learning process is really the dynamic driver of the whole thing. And so in some ways, I would say the fund is a learning process more than a fund. And it's a learning process structured as a portfolio of projects organized onto the land. At the same time, I just wanted to mention this piece that what we're doing with the Barichara Regeneration Fund is creating a working prototype, a bioregional investment platform in one place, the Barichara bioregion, that allows us to practice bioregional design and create a learning environment for people to come to study and practice bioregional design, and to build upward to create an Earth Regeneration Fund that works across bioregions. Or said another way, to help set up these bioregional investment platforms in other bioregions and partner with them to learn from each other about what works and what doesn't. And that's where Earth Regenerators is so important to have in mind, that we have the shared language of the design pathway, that was the book that I wrote, an emerged curriculum. We have some people working on curriculum design to extend beyond the book itself. We have the Community Regenerators cohort of about 35 people who are helping to create new workflows and projects for Earth Regenerators, which means we're growing capacity to really function as a planetary network. So it's important to see that we're not trying to take money from the global network for Barichara. It's better to say we're trying to create robust circulation of a planetary network by creating a prototype in Barichara that is a place of interchange and learning for every other place on Earth where we're connected, which includes people coming here to learn and practice, and people going from here to other places for us to replicate models that we develop in one place to another, to bring them here to test them out and to take them from here to learn in other places. So that's a really important thing to have in mind. And something I've been saying all along is that the big problem we have with Earth Regeneration is the problem of linking across scales and integrating our projects. So there's coherence to all of the system as a whole. And many of you, if you've attended other webinars, you've probably seen this slide before. But what I want to emphasize is that most of the best projects are at the small scale. Most of the projects that are difficult to even measure how well they're performing are at the large scale. And what we don't yet have is an integrated framework that works across all of them. And so part of this is also to establish a design school for Earth Regeneration that has a location in Barichara. The first location would be in Barichara. And then it could partner with other places to grow into that planetary network. So we can try to achieve this coherence across the entire planet. So with that said, now let's talk a little bit about Barichara. So Barichara is a little village, a Spanish colonial town in the northern Andes of Colombia, has about 6,000 people that live in the town. It's a tourist destination, a national monument of Colombia. And if you look at the satellite image, you might notice how much of the middle of the picture is yellow or white, and it's not green. And that's because about 98% of the native forest was cut down almost half a century ago. The tropical dry forest of this region, which is 70% endemic species. That means 7 out of every 10 species that live here do not exist anywhere else on Earth. And it's a severely degraded landscape. What I've highlighted in this image is that there are a number of different kinds of projects that are already underway. We have the Bioparque, the community forest project, which is reforestation effort in the town itself. There's a solidarity network of 14 campesino farms or fincas that are in the agricultural center of the region. There are a number of water retention projects on private land where people are learning how to do water retention and teaching their neighbors. There are efforts to do ecological and climatic research to understand how to do territorial scale design. And so we have a lot of things that are not actually mentioned in this image. There's a lot of stuff that's happening here. But the idea is that we're practicing thinking by zooming out to this scale. And the scale of this satellite image is roughly 500,000 hectares. So if you wanted to think of it, that's like 50 miles by 50 miles in a big square. A region that you could walk across in 2 days from one end to the other, and that you could get pretty familiar with in the span of 6 months to a year. And if you lived here, of course, you'd get more intimate with the nooks and crannies and the detailed places. But it's a place sufficiently large to be transformational and sufficiently small because of the shape of the mountain range to have a fairly closed climatic system, which means it's possible to change the weather, to reverse desertification by bringing the forest back to this landscape. And we can measure our progress at the scale of these satellite images. The other thing that's really important to have in mind is that the Amazon rainforest is about to shut off. The biotic pump that brings moisture into South America is very close to shutting down and is effectively impossible to stop at this point in time. Sometime in the next 2 to 10 years, the Amazon rainforest is going to begin a cascade of no longer being forest and becoming grasslands. And during this time, we need to build up a continental and planetary scale network. So we need bioregions spread all across South America. And what we're doing in Barichara is already partnering with Antioquia, which is north and west of here on the other side of the mountains, where they have a bioregional scale project. And we're creating a leadership program for both of them in territorial design. So we're already practicing working in parallel with other bioregions that have some ecological and cultural similarities and also unique features of their context, so that we can practice building this network even as we build the first bioregional project. Which again, that means the Barichara Regeneration Fund is a prototype. It's not a standalone project. So getting more into the weeds or into the details, about 3.5 months ago, I posted photographs of the piece of land you see here, which is on the top of the ridgeline connecting Barichara and Villanueva, which is the nearby town. And this heavily degraded landscape, 3 hectares of land. I posted pictures of it on Facebook, and in a 24-hour period, people gifted me $10,000 to try to buy the land. So we've been in a negotiation with the owners about buying the land. They said that they couldn't sell it for less than 3 times that price. There's brothers and sisters who own it together, and it's a complicated mess. So we transformed the conversation into, what if we take the most degraded parts of this land and turn it into a nature reserve, set permanent restrictions on it, allow the campesino farmers to keep ownership of the land so that their children inherit it, and use all of that money to pay for the regeneration, including hiring their families to do work so that they get educated in this process of how to do permaculture design. What's interesting is that this piece of land is at the top of a tributary that goes down to Rio Barichara. It's the top of a drainage valley. And the family that collectively owns this piece of land, 6 of those family members have 6 different farms in the same drainage basin. So if we start regenerating this land, we will improve the water supply for all of their farms. So what we're working on here is creating a framework of cultivating a sense of stewardship and care in local people who are from here so that they maintain ownership of the land. And what we do is we pay them not to develop it in another way. And we pay for the development of regeneration on the land to make this part of our network. And we went this morning with a topographer to start doing detailed mapping of which parts of the land we could potentially turn into this nature reserve. So this process is ongoing and live at the moment. And this is one of the pieces of land that is in our portfolio of projects. It's interesting, if you zoom out to a larger scale, that piece of land is on the right in this image. And on the left, where the arrow is pointing, is the Moncora Bioparque, which is a 6.5 hectare community reforestation project. What's interesting is this whole thing, this crest or this ridge line, 5 kilometers long, 2.5 miles from one end to the other, about 500 hectares of land in total, is the groundwater supply of the 2 villages. So what we're doing is we're starting to organize a network with 2 nodes, one at each end of an aquifer system, to start a design process for the entire aquifer system, using demonstration projects, education, cultural change, and various models of cooperation. So here you can already see that even though we don't technically have the Barichara Regeneration Fund, we're behaving as though we do. We're prototyping it by walking the path and taking these actions. So this is an example where the organizing of the landscape shows how 2 projects become organized around a ridgeline, and automatically they mean something different. They mean the security of water for the 10,000 people who live in these 2 villages, instead of being 2 independent projects. So this way of thinking and this way of approaching landscape organization is a really critical feature of the portfolios. Another thing is that because we have active connections to both pieces of land, we can start looking at the similarities and differences. And just looking at photographs of the 2 pieces of land, they're both heavily eroded and degraded. They're both near the top of the ridgeline. They both are looking down on a beautiful valley with epic vistas, which means they would be prime candidates for someone to build a giant mansion as their weekend vacation home, which is what's destroying a lot of this landscape. And so if we can find anchor locations that demonstrate a different model of economic development, we can stop that way of destroying landscapes to put a house with a view, and instead create a very different model of economic development, which is going to be essential for the future of all bioregions. The second piece of land that we're already negotiating is called Las Albercas, which is basically a name given to it because it has 3 natural well springs, all of which are dried up. And it's this piece of land that's colored in the darker green with the yellow boundary. What you can see is that it's almost directly below the Bioparque, the community forest. It's down at the bottom of the cliff. It's in an ecological corridor where the neighbors are already doing reforestation. The Guaymaro campsite is on an 8-hectare property of the neighbors where they've already planted 3,000 native trees. What I didn't put in this image is just further to the left and above is another 7 hectares of land by their neighbor, a Colombian woman, who is also doing reforestation. And if you look at the line that's connecting the Bioparque down, this what looks like a hiking trail, that is the Tobares Trail, which is an indigenous walking path that connects between this village and another village further up the canyon. And so there's an infrastructure of footpaths that connects across this land. And what we're wanting to do with this piece of land is to purchase it with money from the Barichara Regeneration Fund. We're negotiating a fair price right now, even though we don't have the money yet, with the idea that this could be a location to create a design school. It could be the physical home of the Barichara Ecoversity, which is the locally focused ecosystem of education for Barichara. And it could also be the physical home of the Design Institute for Regenerating Earth, which anchors the Earth Regenerators platform to a physical place. So we can develop curriculum and training and practice around Earth regeneration at the planetary scale, and practice bioregional design at the territorial scale, and do both things in the same place by completing an ecological corridor with reforestation projects and having ancestral indigenous footpaths to connect between the villages. So you can walk from the town of Barichara down to the site in about 25 minutes. And it's a beautiful walk. So the idea is that this is a piece of land that, with the foundation we're setting up, that we would turn this land into a commons for everyone to come and learn, and use it as a demonstration site for creating a food forest and native forest reforestation projects. And use this as a demonstration site to teach people in the territory, as well as to teach people, like how Ava said she's coming in January. People who come from somewhere else can come and learn, and we'll have physical anchors, locations that they can do their work, have places to stay while they're here, and have programs and activities organized around the network of projects. So these are 2 pieces of land, really 3 if you include the bioparking, that are all part of our portfolio. Whereas in this case, we would need to raise the money to buy it. So it's in the purview of our work because we're engaging in a transformational pro-social process in the negotiations for the land, which are fascinating stories. PJ and I laugh a lot as we talk about what happens each time with these really myopic, closed-minded, wealth-extracting people trying to just sell the land for a quick buck. And how we engage with them in this land regeneration process is a fascinating and essential part of the work. But these are 3 of the pieces of land that we're already engaging with. At the larger level, we've been mapping out regions of the land and organizing them around the structures of the landscape so that the portfolio is both projects and zones of development. So this area called Santa Elena is the area of agricultural production. And there's a nonprofit called Terra Innova that has helped create a network of 14 campesino farms that do agroforestry projects, regenerative farming, and organic gardening. And so there's a network of projects that already exists there, organizing itself around the high quality soils and the better precipitation patterns that make that a place for agriculture. This area called El Caucho is the aquifers that I was talking about, the 500 hectares of land that have a system of aquifers for the groundwater supply of the 2 villages. What's called here Zona Pie de Peña, which is just the zone at the foot of the cliff, if you translate it into English, is that ecological corridor that includes Las Albercas, Guaymaro, and the other projects. There's also, if you zoomed into Barichara, the Cinturón Verde, which just means green belt, which is a network of forest reserves, private forest reserves, that people in the community have set up on their property that have formed a network already. And so these are ways that the landscape is already organizing itself that would become part of the way we structure the fund and structure the network and the portfolio of projects. Also, we need an anchor institution that is neutral with respect to all of the local projects so that it can disperse money to them to create programs and services. And so we're creating Fundación Sueños del Bosque, just means dreams of the forest. And the mission of this foundation is to really gather together everyone who wants to do this reforestation work and create a different kind of economy. And this is the legal recipient of funds and the disperser of funds into the territory. So the idea is to have an anchor institution locally that is neutral relative to all the other partners so that it can convene, coordinate, and disperse funds so that it can hold the space of territorial planning and territorial action. And this foundation really is a mechanism, it's a bank account that can receive funds in a nonprofit status and then can disperse the funds. But what it represents as a narrative is a neutral position relative to the other projects, the ability to create coordination and cooperation at the territorial scale through its mission and its relationship to the other projects with the Barichara Regeneration Fund organizing those activities. So the fund itself would be housed within this foundation, and the foundation would serve the role of coordinating and planning for the territory, including dispersing of funds as one of its features. Now to the work that has gathered us today, which is to create this fund. What I want to talk about is how we can do something that is either impossible or inevitable, and we're going to find out by trying. And that is we're going to see if we can raise the money to prototype this. And as I've been looking at the price of land here and the kinds of projects we're doing, I came to an amount of $500,000 that if we had this much money, we would have the ability to purchase, just using the money outright, to purchase somewhere between 5 and 15 pieces of land. Some of them larger, like Las Albercas, and others smaller. Or also we could purchase 1 or 2 pieces of land and then help local landowners to convert their land into nature reserves and then use this amount of money on 20 or 30 pieces of land. So the idea is that this amount of money is something that is substantial enough in scale for the price of land here that it could be transformational. And to use this fund to create a network of regenerative projects, to actually structure them so they function as a network, to give birth to this design school for earth regeneration with a physical location, and to offer the prototype of a bioregional investment platform. And what's really interesting about this is that when we start to look at it as a network and say, what are its elements? We have the fund itself, which is just gathering money together and creating a learning process around a portfolio of projects and measuring their health as a portfolio. And as a rough sort of breakdown of how the fund is structured, about 80% of it is for land acquisitions and for converting land to reserves. And about 20% is for support capacities, which could mean that it passes the money on to local organizations to run programs, that it provides housing and other kinds of infrastructure on the land-based projects it's working with. And that this is about 1/5 of the money that's gathered in the fund. So this fund becomes a coordinating mechanism and a learning ecosystem for how to design territorial scale regeneration. It structures itself as a network of regenerative projects. And one thing that's really interesting about Colombia is we have a specific legal model that's called a civil society nature reserve, Reserva Natural Sociedad Civil. And this model is interesting because a person can have private land, agree to set restrictions on their land for conservation purposes, create ecologically aligned business activities so that they can make money at the household or family scale, and then have a necessity to preserve and conserve the land while getting tax exemption for the land. So this model exists. There are about 800 of them in existence in Colombia, lots of different models. So an example of a sustainability oriented business would be something like regenerative farming to sell local fruits and vegetables, where they can run a business and make money, but they are also engaging in land practices that protect the land. So this sort of balance between ecological and economic needs is something that is very flexible for each piece of land to have its own restrictions and model while being set up as one of these nature reserves. So what we want to do is provide administrative support, facilitation and design support, and financial support for private landowners, to mostly be local campesino farmers and campesino families, to convert their land into nature reserves. So that we have this network of projects. And then the coordination of learning within the bioregion itself is what we're calling Barichara Ecoversity, which means we would create a local partner to a global network of ecoversities. Ecoversities are alternative schools that focus on decolonization of education, unlearning processes to unlearn colonizer patterns of thinking, and to have a curriculum that is structured around local ecological and cultural context. So the idea is that within the Barichara region, we create one of these ecoversities, and we use the fund to enable us to do that. And then it helps us to coordinate the learning processes across the entire territory. So this is the basic structure that we see for this fund. Now we want to practice and prototype how to do it in practical, realistic terms. So our mission, if we choose to take it in creating this fund, is to try to raise $500,000 together in the next couple of months to create this portfolio and prototype. And then devote the next 10 years to building the global network of bioregional learning centers that this is an anchor catalyst for. And I say it's an anchor catalyst because it is by no means the only one. But what's interesting is how the area where we're doing this work is sufficiently far away from big cities. The nearest airport is about 4 hours away. That even during the pandemic, we had 0 cases of COVID. There were 13 cases reported in Barichara, and every one of them was someone who arrived from the city, went into quarantine, and didn't pass it on to any of the local people. This isolation and remoteness allows us to be more flexible in creating innovative prototypes of experimenting Colombia is this paradox of being like the Wild West. You can have crazy libertarian, ridiculous, dangerous ideas, mafias, and all kinds of things. And also you can be really innovative as social entrepreneurs and create really interesting models that no one's created before. Both are possible and both are happening. And with this fund, we would focus on this social entrepreneurship, social innovation approach. So that's the idea that I want to talk with all of you about. And what I think is really important here is to say something about the planetary scale, which is that we basically committed ourselves to abrupt and catastrophic climate change sometime in the 1970s or 1980s. And the story, we can turn it around in the next 10 years, is completely mythological. And we're in a place, if you look at the limits to growth study and other kinds of very rigorous work, that we have been in a process of collapse for a long time. And it is in a time of intensification. And the real challenge for us is a statistical challenge. That if we have enough regenerative cultures doing this bioregional work, some of them will survive what's coming in the next 50 to 100 years. If we have 0 of them, it's possible humans go extinct. I don't think human extinction is likely at this point in time, but it is very much a possibility. And so that's on the extreme end. On the less extreme end is that some of us sort of finagle together and happen to get close to these regenerative economies, but are damaged by the connection to the globalized economic system as it self-destructs. Because it has been an overshoot since the mid-1970s. It is accelerating its own demise, and all indications show this. So what we need to do is create parallel economies that work in relative autonomy. Relative autonomy means collaborate with other relatively autonomous regions. And if we create enough of them, those that don't make it will be made up for by those that do. And what that means is we need to have working bioregional prototypes as quickly as possible and replicate them as quickly as possible. So what I'm talking about here is, imagine we did crowdfunding and raised $500,000. And we start prototyping this process, embedding it into the global network and all the other things that are going on. What we're doing is creating a force multiplier of catalyzing change. And so our opportunity here is that level of capacity. And our danger here is to miss the remaining windows of time to create these bioregional prototypes, which, by the way, everything we needed to know for bioregionalism was all written in the 60s and 70s. There are fantastic entire collections of books about this. But for various reasons, the entrenchment of development has kept them from being able to grow and mature and to spread. Only as the globalized system breaks down and collapses will there be a release of this entrenchment to enable these bioregional economies to emerge. We need to have many of them ready whenever that happens. So whenever the globalized economy collapses enough, there are several of these baby bioregional economies that are at least able to crawl and maybe able to walk. And that's going to take time. So the idea here is in the next 10 years, we create a learning framework to prototype somewhere between 5 and 50 of these bioregional economies. I don't know what number. The real number for the entire planet might be around 800. But what we're talking about here is what we can do within this network, which could actually be 200 bioregions, I don't know. But it could also be 0. And the way it's 0 is if we don't do this. And that's something that's just super important to say. This is an acupuncture point in the global system. So with that said, I'd love to open it up for maybe 15 or 20 minutes of questions, clarification, comments. Just how are we feeling about this? Does this make sense? Is Joe completely crazy and off his rocker? Yes. Like, what are we doing here? Are we actually going to do this? So I'd love to just open it up. If anyone has thoughts, comments, or reactions? Let's share a little bit. Let's let the room breathe. I see a couple of people are raising their hands. I have Amber and Stan, so maybe Amber first by Stan. Amber.
Sure, yeah, thank you. This makes perfect sense, and I love the way that you've easily broken it down so it's digestible. And you said the Amazon is an acupressure point. Is that correct? An acupressure point, like a bioregional acupressure. I'm wondering, what are the other ones that you know of? Because that makes perfect sense to me, you know, with the Amazon being an atmospheric river.
Well, there are several. Another one that's really, really important is the Asian monsoon, the Indian monsoon, which is another large scale pattern. The El Nino, La Nina, which is a temperature anomaly in the Pacific Ocean that shifts weather systems for the entire planet.
So does it make
several of them.
So does it make sense to once Barichara starts to get off the ground, does it make sense to look at this project as something that is replicable and could be actionable at these other pressure points that are significant and need to be strategic for us to succeed?
I see this as the work of the Design Institute for Regenerating Earth. The idea that in parallel with bioregional design, we need to create the frameworks for planetary scale. And the closest to this that we would see in a consistent way is what the Stockholm Resilience Center does. But you know, with the planetary boundaries framework, talking about something different because it's designed for dynamic processes. So it's designed for the dynamic process of the biotic pump of the Amazon. It's designed for the process of atmosphere-ocean interface that creates the surface temperature anomalies of El Nino, La Nina. Right? It's these sorts of things. And also rain formation for mountain glaciers, the water supply of many cities. You're going to find these intermediate scales that are going to be very important. And it's very complex stuff, incredibly complex stuff. But yeah, we absolutely need to be thinking at those scales as well. I see Stan followed by Julian. So Stan?
Oh, thank you, Joe. So this is very inspiring and very well done, and a really interesting mixture of social capital that I think is a key part of the investment. I also am very intrigued with the way you've been negotiating with the land. That people are switching from trying to make money off of you to trying to use you to get a better economic framework for their land. And this reminds me of what happened in open source. You know, we couldn't buy all the hardware and we couldn't buy the software. We had to talk the hardware guys into opening up their hardware, and we had to convince people to quit selling their software and allow us to write better software. So I like the idea that you mentioned that Colombia has a trust that you can donate your land or certify your land into a framework for a commons infrastructure benefit, right? That the eco-trust kind of idea. I think that's the right idea. People should be donating their land into a commons for some commons benefit. And the fundraising could be helping to do sort of the social capital vesting of the value in the land and providing the feedback so people get rewarded for doing a better set of farming, essentially. So I like that idea. And then I think if it were sort of a pro-social feedback mechanism, sort of setting up a circular economy, that's the kind of pattern language we could all reuse. You know, we would have to count on our local land trust to create some sort of a land lease program. But once the land is entrusted into sort of an Elinor Ostrom pattern, you know, configuring that pattern is kind of like an operating system. So first of all, I'm very interested in helping raise the money, but I really think this kind of investment approach would really, really work. So we've seen Mercy Corps, you know, it's a nonprofit, mostly famous for helping people after disasters with hurricanes and stuff, get together some sort of a recovery fund. But they've been very active in our backyard here in Portland, creating a new vesting model so that you don't just have a landowner charging rent. You have the city donating, you know, allocating a zoning model for land use, and then having a vesting program, sort of like stock options that you vest because of your social capital or because of the natural capital. And that vesting program can be set up as a program that you would manage, or, you know, some community driven. And they don't have to be identical, they could be community centric.
Yeah,
and this
absolutely.
is something I think that the Native American tribes have been very interested in. And I think especially the minority communities, not only getting, you know, some money, but actually getting invested in a place that is distinctive. So I'll stop there, but I really think this is a great start, and I really think your strength is in the social capital, and I think it's more fundable as a portfolio of social capital in the context of a very special place. So we do a lot of work with Colombia because of their SDG innovation. We do a lot of work with Colombia because of their food. So there's a whole lot of coffee stuff, trying to figure out how to get the money to the farmers. So I think you're in the right place to sort of do a showcase.
Yeah, just to name that, one of our partners in this is Pro Social World with David Sloan Wilson and Paul Atkins. And they have just submitted a grant application to the Templeton Foundation to offer pro-social training to groups in Latin America. And we're one of the Latin American partners to be able to do work in Barichara. So this focus on Eleanor Ostrom and pro-social is essential. It is really, really important. So just echoing that. So right now I have a sequence of 3 people, Julian, followed by Sandra, and then I had a private message from Gail that she would like to speak as well. So Julian?
Sure, thanks, Joe. You know, I'm sort of trying to anticipate how difficult or easy it might be to raise $500,000 in 2 to 3 months. Maybe we find that there are a lot of folks who are like-minded and who are out there who are, and it might make our task pretty easy. But in the event that it is not, I guess my question for you is, how much energy and educational efforts do you feel like you want to put into, as you said, you know, a lot of existing institutional investors, they just don't know how to invest in something like this, right? You know, if we find ourselves needing to make up a certain gap in amount of funds, would we, you know, are we going to try to invest a lot of energy, right, to try to, you know, quote unquote, convert them? Also, I'm thinking there may be family offices out there, right, who are perhaps more flexible, I mean, and not so stringent in their ways, but perhaps they don't actually know how to invest in things like this, but are open to it, right, and could use the education. So I guess all this is a long way of asking, like, you know, what is a strategic target investor here? And how do we go about tailoring the story and the energies that goes into coming up with the educational materials to get them to be interested to invest?
Yeah, I think this is a critical question because it's about strategies of approach and about prioritization. And what I feel that's going to be really important is that we really look for, I wouldn't say what are the easy wins, but I'd say is where the energy is alive. And I think the place where the energy could be alive is in what would basically be small donations between small amounts of money of, like, you know, $5 up to maybe $1,000 or $2,000, just private individuals donating money. And then there are things like people who, when I publish my book, I'm going to give all of the proceeds to this fund. So it might be, you can pay $25 for the book, or you can pay $50 for the book, and the money goes to the fund, and that sort of thing, these kind of micro scale. And so I think there's a really important need to emphasize personal relationships more than institutional relationships at the beginning, because the institutional relationships just take more time and they take more vetting in both directions. So the way I would see us doing this is creating a funding package for those who have connections with specific funders or foundations. So that part of the way that we do this fundraising is those of us who have those connections and want to use the connection, like I've worked with this foundation in the past, maybe I could get them to give $25,000, that then we have a custom approach and support from this group to help prepare the materials for that interaction. And that we focus sort of scaled upward as priority number 1 is small scale, broad grassroots outreach. Scale number 2 is tailored conversations at an intermediate level, which would be these like $10,000 to $50,000 or maybe $100,000 level donors that might be able to give, institutional or private. And that it'll take longer to build the relationships with the other kinds of institutional players. So the 2 to 3 month timeframe is possible, but unrealistic is what I think. And I'm happy to be wrong about that, but I think that the amounts of strings attached in those institutional frameworks and how navigating back is usually not worth it, especially if you're like applying for grants with 200 other applicants and then having high overhead of reporting and limited programmatic focus. I think that approach is a very broken approach. And so that's my initial reaction. But I also think this is about the wisdom of our group as a crowd, not the wisdom of Joe and his opinion. So this is where I sit, just adding it in to say, Joe sits here as one person in the group. But I think this is the type of thing we should have open dialogue about as a group, about how do we go about doing this. I'd like to go on to Sandra and then to Gail.
Yes, thanks, Joe. I'm a bit, I think, on the same side of Julian and Stan with this. There is a similar program in Mexico that is being run by the public sector, by the government, the National Commission for Protected Areas, and it's called Voluntarily Dedicated Areas for Conservation. And they are doing the same, sustainable businesses in these areas and supporting with capacity building. So my question would be, if we want to have this as a pilot for moving forward in scaling up and replicating, as I understand from the presentation and from all the posts you've been sharing, a curious question, why Colombia, being so difficult in terms of legal ownership of the land, first, and second, what could be, do you consider, more than what would be, are you considering a finance model, an investment model for investors, or is it just funding as of now? Or are you planning at some point to introduce a return on investment for this one? I understand that the first thing we need to do is to manage the risk of land ownership. So it's a great approach to first raise money for just ensuring we have the ownership of this. But from there, maybe at some point, if we want to scale up and replicate, the projects will need a business component, an ROI component. So those are my clarifications.
Those are really good questions. I'd start by saying why Colombia is really not Colombia, but why Barichara and the Santander region that Barichara is within. Because in many ways, this is not about legal frameworks, because you're right, land issues in Colombia are really complex. But what it really is about pro-social cooperation processes. It's how do we learn how to have these conversations and build these relationships. which is why it's so interesting that we're talking about, sweetie, daddy's talking right now. I come back to you in just a minute. I know you look beautiful, Elise, with your blanket. Thank you, thank you. What I see is that we're in a place that is anchored in such strong local culture, that it's working with that local culture that is really the capacity we're working with. And the land ownership's complexity is really the complexity of cultural trauma in a place with a history of conflict.
Mhm.
And so, so it's, you know, the other way I would say it is, this is where our family is doing this work, and we keep finding capacity. There's a really strong local capacity, which is why I think it's higher real than national. And the second question about ROI, I think it's sort of like the difference between a baby that's still in the womb and a teenager who's working part-time jobs. That when the baby is in the womb, it needs to be protected and cultivated and nurtured. It's really important to keep ROI from bringing extraction in that will undo the development that's needed, which happens very often. And so I think it's very important for, where there is ROI, the ROI is not for external investors, which easily defaults to a form of colonialism again. Instead, it's ROI of the local families and their businesses, which is local economy development. And if there is an ROI in this, it needs to be embedded within a larger cooperative framework. So if we create a global platform cooperative, so if you want to think of Earth Regenerators as an example of a platform cooperative, where it might be a coordinator between these bioregional projects, then investors in the planetary platform can direct their investments into specific bioregions, have investment returns come back to the platform to reinvest into other bioregions. But that highest level needs to be a cooperative, and it needs to not be extractive. And so I think that's the place where the ROI discussion often breaks down. The ROI is perfectly fine if it's coming back into the system in another way. But it's a hugely important question. I think it's one that actually warrants a kind of research discussion. Like, we should be talking about the strengths, weaknesses of these different approaches and what stage in the process they should come in. It's so important. I want to invite Gail to speak because she had asked. She had a question or comment. And I see also that we're getting close to the agreed time. So I want to ask if anyone else has questions, please raise your hand or send me a note to let me know. And then we'll start to wrap up just to respect the amount of time that we'd agreed to. On to you, Gail.
Sure. I just have a few points. I made some notes. One Earth Conservation works. One area we work in is in Honduras, the La Mosquitia area, doing parrot conservation, and we use a pro-social model very much there and everywhere we work. And we've had a lot of success with it. We took people, mostly indigenous, local people, many of whom were conducting, were in the illegal wildlife trade because that was the only way they could feed their families. And they are now conservationists. We grew from having a handful of nests that fledged birds successfully now to over 150 nests that we're monitoring. They are monitoring. We guide them in the work. But the more important thing is their attitudes have changed. They want to protect their birds. They want to protect their land. They don't want to engage in the illegal work anymore. And that's been the biggest driver of the success they've had there. So I think you're very much on the right track with the pro-social model. Regarding the fundraising, crowdfunding is very labor intensive. I'm sure you know that. But remember, we have over 2,300 people now in the Earth Regenerators group. So if we could enlist as many people as possible from that to, reach out to their networks and try to help raise the money, we might be able to do this. Maybe not in 2 or 3 months. You might have to do it in stages. You raise the first 50,000 and go buy one piece of land, that sort of thing. But I actually think starting with the crowdfunding is a good way to go, because you're absolutely right. I'm a grant writer. I've been working with foundations for years. It takes forever. It's very rare to get the quick grant. It does happen, but it's rare. The other things is I had emailed you, Joe, about looking for another. Joe had asked if One Earth could be a fiscal sponsor for the project. We're very tiny. we don't have the capacity to do that, but there are other larger nonprofits out there who might be willing to. And I like, for instance, we work with Wildlife Conservation Society. They're huge. Maybe someone like that, I don't know, but maybe between who I know and who other people in these groups know, maybe we can find you a fiscal sponsor in the US who will serve as a bridge until you can get the foundation set up. So those are the main points I wanted to make.
Yeah, no, thank you for all of those points. And just to re-emphasize the first one, which is cultural change is the engine of regenerative change. And we're definitely finding that in these land negotiations as we have the moment in the conversation when they get it. Like, oh, you're not just trying to buy the land as a rich gringo to put your nice big mansion up there, you're doing something different. And like, oh, we actually could benefit and we could work together. And the mindset shifts in a matter of a few seconds in some cases. It's been really interesting and we're just getting started. So I think that there's something very powerful about this. What I want to say is, if I see if no one else has their hands up, which it looks like, okay, no one has their hands up, is
Max had his hand up, I believe.
Oh, Max, did you have your hand up? I didn't see it.
Yeah, I have a question, a quick comment, but if you were trying to kind of weave together a thread that was already existing in the conversation, you could go for it for sure.
Go for it, go for it. Please,
Okay,
cool. I just didn't see it.
Oh, okay. So I have a question. Is there a significant portion of the land in the area owned by folks who don't live there? Is it like foreign owned or anything like this?
It's a real mix. So mostly what you have is you have a couple of local people who got good at playing Monopoly. Like I met a guy yesterday who literally has a stack this thick of deeds. He owns probably 50 properties, but he lives here and he's just a total parasite, just playing the game. And so there are definitely some of those people. And interestingly, the richest of them are people from here who just bought up all the land with wheeling, dealing 30 years ago, back when it was really cheap.
Okay.
The big risk here is people coming from the city, like from Bogota. And very little is from outside because this place is difficult enough to get to. 4 hours by bus from Bucaramanga and 8 hours from Bogota, that people outside, like from the US or other places, mostly don't know about this place. And so it's almost entirely Colombian owned. And the majority of the wealth hoarding is local Colombians. But at the same time, in the countryside, it's impressive how many smallholder campesino farmers there are. In other parts of Colombia, it's just these giant mafia plantations. And that's not the case here.
Okay, so would you, I'm just wondering, let's say we were in a situation where we raised a couple $100,000 and we could go forth with purchasing a piece of land or a couple pieces of land or et cetera. Is it reasonable to be concerned that it might not be strategic to implement the process incrementally from the perspective, or I guess the concern that you would be increasing property values as you improve the land and then make additional realty acquisitions more expensive?
Yeah, I would say that the thinking here is we don't want to buy very much land. Which is why I'm saying a $500,000 fund instead of a $5 million fund. We want to strategically buy a couple pieces of land. And we want to demonstrate different models of development on that land and connect the land to those from outside who come here. So like Max, if you come here, you would be connected to some of the land that this foundation would own. But the majority of the work, as much as possible, is cultural change. It's social learning. It's helping the local campesinos to give their children something to inherit that's different than they thought they could give them. So we don't want to buy very much land here. We don't want to manipulate market prices even by accident. What we really want to do is have a couple of anchor locations. And we've already come up with two general criteria. One is places of significant ecological importance. Like we recently learned, there's only one place in the entire network of canyons where there are parrots in this region, because there's one cliff with mineral deposits and the parrots come there to eat the minerals to help them digest fruit. And so it's a key ecological migration pattern for that one piece of land where the parrots come. So there are places that are significant ecological importance. And the other is pieces of land that are in imminent economic danger, where they're ecologically important and because someone might cut down all the trees and build houses or something like this, that we would step in to try to save the land. But the majority of the work would be working with local people with their own land.
Cool.
Because of this, exactly the problem you're bringing up. And the other problem is if we're just seen as gringos with money, then we're not going to do any transformational culture change. People are just going to try and sell it to us at high prices and make money, which is exactly the opposite of what we want to do. So we need to be very careful not to signal we're buying a lot of land, and instead signal we're helping local people to use their land better and have a couple of anchor pieces of land.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Sandra, and then I think we should wrap up just because of the time, or start to wrap up. But Sandra, please.
Yeah, Joe, how is it that have you been presenting these to foundations or to financial institutions? And if so, how are they embracing or engaging with the pro-social component, the strong component that you are promoting? Because it's of course, for this group and for many of us, it's a very, let's say, very logic model to move forward with for embracing the value of land and for engaging properly not only the current generation, but the next generation.
Hi, Susan.
But what about the perspective or the vision from financial institutions or foundations, if you have already discussed about the pro-social approach?
Yeah, I have not talked with any of them. And I actually have very intentionally worked at the social network level and not at the organizational level. And this is intentional for me personally. So this isn't about what we all do, it's just what I do. I have two parts of who I am that make me difficult. One is I'm very charismatic, and so I attract charismatic people. And I've been in very unfortunate situations with narcissists and psychopaths. And so I'm protecting myself from that pattern as much as I can.
Yeah.
It's very damaging and it sucks. And the other is that I've been able to be powerful by speaking what I consider to be true, by being disconnected from the constraint of someone's organization. If I'm speaking for someone's organization, I need to censor myself to operate within their brand. And I get myself in a lot of trouble for this because I'm very bad at doing that. I'm much more just honest and open. I'm much more open source. And so I very intentionally keep myself neutral with respect to organizations as a place of influence. So that's just the weird quirks of being Joe. So that's where I am. But what I really want to do is build a tapestry of collaboration where other people have different relationships. And that's part of the strength of our diversity.
Perfect. Thank you.
What I want to do now, if there are no more comments or questions, is I'd like to just briefly say that the way I see this process going, which is you're going to see it's in very broad strokes because it's emergent. And I honestly cannot tell you what it's going to look like. No one can. But what I can tell you is that if we set a shared intention to do this, what would be really wonderful is to establish a weekly standing meeting. So every week at the same time. So let's say it's Wednesdays at 3 o'clock Chicago time, whatever it is. We pick a time and the meeting happens each week for 2 months. And those who can attend, and those who can't, don't. And we record it each time. And what we do is we set up a crowdfunding campaign and we start rolling out just crowdfunding. In parallel with this, the conversations with institutional partners can start to grow and develop into proper partnerships during this time. And what we can use is the Earth Regeneration Fund group that is inside Earth Regenerators. I've created a tag for the Barichara Regeneration Fund by making it a topic. So you can go into that group and post content and tag Barichara Regeneration Fund. And so if everyone is a member of that group, then we can exchange in dialogue and sharing information using that as a communication tool. And that's a place where anyone in this group can invite other people to the group. You can leave the group, you can stay in the group, you can lead initiatives. You can just say, hey, I've got this connection with this group of people over here, let's go do something. And then you report back to the rest of us just so we know what's going on. And we're focused on building this fund and this prototype as one objective, but the larger objective is how do we learn how to do this overall? So that we really can get this into action as quickly as possible. So that's what I wanted to just share as like the general framework is a standing meeting time using the online platform, the Earth Regeneration Fund group within Earth Regenerators to engage in discussion. And then what we do is we just roll out, I'll prepare some materials for crowdfunding. Gail has been helping prepare some materials for a fundraising packet. So when that's just a little bit more polished and ready, we'll share to the group for feedback and improvement, and also to modify it for specific places where it might be taken to. And then what we'll do is we'll look for patterns of leadership where people feel called to lead in different activities. So each of you is invited into your own personal leadership role, whatever feels alive and important to you. And we just co-create and learn together. And at the end of this, it's going to be really interesting to see what happened. So that's the way I see this going. It's a big experiment, and it could turn into something really beautiful. So what I'd like to do is, we're now 15 minutes over the time that we'd originally agreed to. So I think it's time for us to close. Already had a couple of people who've needed to leave. I saw that Julian asked the question about having luck opening a bank account. Let me answer tomorrow, because we've taken an important step that was completed today. It took 3 weeks of bureaucracy. But tomorrow we should be able to open the bank account. So I'll let you know. For those of you who don't know, I can't start the foundation because I don't have a national ID card, because I don't have a visa. I don't have a visa because I don't have a bank account for Colombian business, because you can't open a Colombian business without the national ID card. Welcome to Colombia. And so I'm learning all the ins and outs of bureaucracy here. But we're hoping that we've got that nearly resolved. So, so that's it. Are there any closing comments, or shall we just say goodbye? If anyone has something you'd really like to say, please just speak up. And of course, we have the future to continue talking. This is just the first conversation. And if not, then just say thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to be walking this path with all of you. And I want to see what we can create together. So let's do this.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Joe.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Everybody, bye.
Good to see you all.
Joe.